Successful Audit webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the QMS Program Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for everyone. All of our participants are on mute, but we absolutely want to address your questions, so please utilize the question portion of the dashboard. We will address your questions at the end of the presentation. One of the more common questions we get is, will we make copies of the presentation available? Yes, we will provide the slides. Those are provided in PDF format. They'll be available for download shortly after we're finished. And if you want to rewatch the webinar with voiceover, that option is also available on our website under previously recorded webinars. Our topics for today, we're going to have a little bit of background information. We're going to review where the requirement for interaction of processes was found in ISO 9001-2008 and where it is currently found in ISO 9001-2015. We're going to take a look at the officially sanctioned definition for a process, and in so doing, get an idea of both what is and what is not a process. And then one of the more popular parts of this presentation, we're going to have some notes on strategies for meeting this requirement. Perhaps you have an existing interaction of processes that you want to retain. We've got some suggestions on how you might strengthen it to meet the requirement and some other examples. So the basis for this being an issue for Perry Johnson Registrars, it goes back to 2014. We were told at that time that we needed to be a little more firm in our assessment of interaction of process or IOP documents. Now this was rooted primarily in a requirement that is referred to as Audit Program Management, or APM. And this comes from ISO 17021, which is the standard that PJR is held accountable to in our audits from ANAB, UCAS, and other accreditation bodies. ISO 17021, as it pertains to audit program management, reads as follows. An audit program for the full certification cycle shall be developed to clearly identify the audit activities that are required to demonstrate that the client's management system fulfills the requirements for certification. So in other words, we are, as a registrar, expected to ensure that our auditors are performing and documenting their audits in such a way that they reflect your management system, which you've established. Now, where that gets difficult is if the interaction of processes document has been poorly conceived, if it does not reflect processes. Again, our policy, the policy that's been inflicted upon us, you might say, is we have to adhere to the client's interaction of processes, and only the client's interaction of processes in the completion of the audit report and other documents that make up the audit package. So where the IOP is poorly conceived or it does not reflect the organization's processes, we've instructed our auditors to address that during their audit up to and including the issuance of a nonconformance. So it's absolutely a real requirement. Now, looking back to ISO 9001-2008, which will of course be expiring in just a couple days, the requirements that were cited for this were as follows. In section 4.1, we had two clauses. First, the organization shall determine the processes that are needed for the quality management system and their application throughout the organization. And then also, the organization shall determine the sequence and interaction of those processes. And then ISO 9001-2008 also required in section 422C that the organization maintain a quality manual. And that quality manual had to include a description of how the processes interacted with each other. Now, in the 2015 version of ISO 9001, the requirements are very similar. In the first two cases, they're almost exactly identical. Again, you shall determine the processes needed for the quality management system, and you shall determine the sequence and interaction of these processes. We would look to section 442, which is kind of a general clause where it says that you will maintain documented information to support the operation of processes. Part of how that clause is correctly interpreted is that you will maintain a document or some form of documented information that stipulates what your processes are and how they interface with each other. So let's continue now with a review of how process is defined. For this, we look to the ISO 9000 document. 9000, of course, is fundamentals and vocabulary. And the sanction definition for process is a set of interrelated or interacting activities that use inputs to deliver an intended result. Now, the key portion of that is interrelated or interacting activities. This is a key aspect of what we're looking for when we look at processes. Processes are not single steps. These are going to be a series of activities that are focused on a shared goal. These are going to be, again, interrelated, interacting activities for turning inputs into outputs. Now, I've provided a list here of some of the more common designations. These were pulled from numerous PJR audit reports, and what are we looking at typically when we look at process designations? Sales is very common. Purchasing is very common. Production, which you might interpret as encompassing numerous activities, is a common designation, and so forth. Now, the expectation is that your interaction of processes document must reflect what you have concluded your processes are. In other words, you're the ones that established your company, you're the ones that established your quality management system and implemented processes to support that system. You tell us what your processes are. One of the questions we occasionally get is, well, how many processes am I supposed to have? Well, there is no minimum requirement, and there's certainly no maximum either. Often we will have companies that come to us with 4 basic processes. They will identify sales, purchasing, production, and support, and they'll indicate that that is the basis for their quality management system. If that is how it's understood internally, that's perfectly acceptable. Now, in terms of what is not a process, IOP documents that get rejected fall into a couple of different types. And one of the more common items that is going to be rejected is an IOP document that presents single steps as full processes. So, for example, create a work order, issue a production schedule, complete a work order, package a product, ship a product. These are likely all steps within a single process. They may make up 2 or 3 processes, but it is highly unlikely that these are standalone processes. Another item that we have come up from time to time, an organization will present us with a IOP document that presents sections from the ISO 9001 standard. And they'll say, well, these are our processes. That is also going to be regarded with concern. You know, if you think about it, how many organizations actually have a process that they call resource management? Or how many organizations have a process that they call measurement, analysis, and improvement? These are sections of the ISO 9001 standard. These are not process designations. So if we see IOP documents with these types of concerns, it is going to be raised as an issue in the context of an audit, and it may result in a nonconformance. Now, as I mentioned, we have some ideas for you, strategies that you can use to meet this requirement with minimal changes to your existing documentation. We recognize, obviously, for a lot of you, you took some care in how you established your IOP. You took a lot of care in making sure that it was personal and so forth. So we don't want to completely disregard the work that was done. We're also well aware that some of you, perhaps on the call today, are long-term clients. You have been certified clients with PJR for many years, and the interaction of processes document is a legacy item. It's something that you have been using for a long time. So how could this possibly now not be acceptable? So for those reasons, we felt that it was appropriate to show you some ideas on tweaking what you're working with, and in so doing, have a more effective fulfillment of the requirements. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a sample interaction of processes document, and we're going to improve it in two key ways. So we're going to begin with just a review of the basic IOP. Now, please note, this example that we're going to look at is not reflective of any particular PGR client, and it was created solely for the purpose of this presentation. Okay, so here we have the raw IOP, and we can see that there are 12 boxes, which we would presume indicate processes, and there are 2 decision diamonds. Now, if we look at this, again, do we consider that something like customer order received, is that a standalone process on its own? Or something like purchased items received, is that a standalone process on its own? Does this organization truly have 12 processes that transform inputs into outputs? Or is there something more going on here? So the first thing we're going to do to improve this IOP is we're going to identify the support processes. Now I'm going to jump back here temporarily. This IOP starts at customer order received and it ends at shipping. And we don't really see any support activities on here. We don't see training. We don't see any of the other support areas that are present in a quality management system. So now, in terms of core process, support process, the ISO 9001 standard and the ISO 9000 standard, they don't draw any particular distinction. We see this a lot, though, this whole idea of core processes, key processes, and support processes. So what happens is that, when an organization puts their IOP together, they're considering more their day-to-day activities and not the support activities that are kind of in the background. So for things like management review, internal audit, training, corrective action, and so forth, those things are missing. So let's amend that. Let's fix that. Okay. So now, as you can see, the original interaction of processes document is still intact. We've not changed it at all, but we have added a designation for support processes. We've lumped them together under the general heading support processes, which is perfectly permissible. And we have also, by way of 3 disconnected arrows, we've indicated that these support processes support the entirety of the rest of the activity. In other words, they support everything else that's going on in this quality management system, which is obviously what's intended by support processes. Now, we're going to take another improvement step here. And again, with the idea being that we want to retain this, this IOP as it was originally conceived. So the strategy that we have seen companies use successfully is to create a key. And the key is going to help you identify what the processes are. Now, there's a number of ways that this can be done. Numbering, alpha characters. For purposes of our test model today, we're going to use color coding. And again, this enables the IOP to stay as is, but it serves the system and the audit process by naming the processes that make up the quality management system. So let's apply this second improvement. Okay, so again, the original IOP has been left intact. We now have support processes called out, and now, by way of color coding, we know that there are 6 processes that make up this quality management system. In the lower left, we have our key. We have sales order entry, we have purchasing, production, shipping, which in the model here happened to be a standalone process to begin with, and a process called quality in addition to support. So what we've accomplished here is we now know what the company's processes are, what they are actually called, and we now have a reflection of support processes. This is an IOP that is ready for audit assessment. Now, obviously, there's more than one way to accomplish this. Over the years, we have seen a lot of different approaches in meeting the IOP, and we wanted to share with you some additional examples of how this requirement is fulfilled. Now, each of these is taken from a current or former PJR client. Permissions were given in all cases. Here's our first example. We have a top-down flow. We have 8 named processes. This is a very straightforward representation, similar in a way to what we were looking at earlier, but with the difference being that each of these processes has a call out of its own on the IOP, so no color coding or anything like that required. Here's an interesting model. This particular model, what I like about this one is you'll note the very unique process names that are called out here. We have inventory management as a standalone process. We have quoting as a standalone process. We have shipping, again, as a standalone process. And we have this idea that quality interfaces equally with 3 of these processes, and then we have something called management related, which we can presume means support, interacting with everything. So again, it's a different strategy, but what I like about this one is the unique nature of the process names. Here's another model. This one is typically referred to as swim lane. You'll note in the left hand part of your screen here, we have 4 named processes. We have sales process, purchasing process, production process, and support. Now, therein, we have a representation of how sales and purchasing operate somewhat independently of each other. Sales is triggered by receipt of orders from customers, and purchasing is triggered by a regular review of available inventory. And they kind of meet in the middle with the issuance of the work orders, which in turn triggers the production process, which, as we can see, there are some unique subnames that are called out here. We have injection molding, trim, and so forth. And in this model, as you can see, shipping is considered a portion of the production process rather than a standalone activity, which is perfectly permissible. Here's another model. This particular company, what they opted to do was to highlight what they refer to as their core processes. And they've indicated that anything that isn't highlighted is considered support. So in this model, we have 5 core processes and then support. So in our audit program management, this would be drawn up as a grand total of 6 activities, 5 core, and then the collected collected support rather. Again, you'll note the unique nature of the process names that are called out here. We have a process called repair and return. We have a distribution process, a service exchange process. This particular company obviously put quite a bit of thought into what are the processes that make up our quality management system. So in conclusion, we want to ensure that our clients are getting a value-added audit, and we want to make sure that we are also meeting the requirements that are that we have to abide by from ISO 17021 and other applicable standards. We hope that the points of this presentation will give you a better understanding of what your processes are, so that you're as prepared for the audit as you can possibly be. I do thank you for your time. I'm going to unlock the question portion of the dashboard. Are there any questions I can answer today? Okay, well, I thank you all for your time and have a real good day.